Hello, my name's Anthony. Welcome to my channel. If you've been following the build so far, you'll know that this isn't your typical, checkbook build. It's kind of in between. I've got the tools to be able to do it, and I've got no money to be able to afford the parts. So we're somewhere in the middle of that. So, what have we got so far? Well, we've got I've put some other bracing in for the engine. There's a bit of an optical illusion going on at the minute because this bar here was made in two pieces, is that piece and that piece, and I've had to shift one of the engine mounts across to get the engine in line. So the engine's in line. The engine is perfectly in line with a cross member at the bottom, but this brace here isn't 90 degrees, sorry, 180 degrees to the, you know what I mean? It's not parallel to the engine or the cross brace. It doesn't matter. If it doesn't move, it doesn't move. It's not lining anything up. It's just a brace. So I've got this tubular piece coming across here to tie both engine mounts in, which is then welded to the cross member at the bottom there. And the reason I've done that for the moment anyway is it's only tacked in here and here, and that's just to brace the front of the car until I can get this brace here, the fore and aft brace that I had bolted in before. I've taken it out because since I've cut the cross member out here and put this bar in between with some two spreader plates on, it's given me a lot more room to shift the engine forwards and up. What that's allowed me to do is to get more clearance under the car, which means this north-south bar can now go back in its normal location, which is there's two bolts here, and then there's two bolts at the back there. So the next job, I've got the exhaust manifold on. It's not fully tightened up. I've got two bolts on there, just snugging it up to the cylinder head, so that I can get a rough idea of how it sits. And if we have a look under the cut, sorry, there's some lens crap on that. So if we have a look under the car, the exhaust manifold isn't that much lower than anything else on the car, really. Ignore the drive shaft. So we've got to a point now where it's at a reasonable height. I'm still not happy with that lump that comes down from the sump, but I have looked online, and you can. There is a guy that cuts them out and welds a plate in there and changes the oil pickup for kit cars, so we can do that. So what have I done? These bars here are bits of steel, quite decently sized bits of tubular steel. Really. I mean, it's quite thick walled. You see there, it's quite thick walled. Yes, it's chrome plated, but you just grind the chrome plating off, and it's just steel underneath. They're actually from a set of kitchen chairs, the armrests. There's one there off a kitchen chair. We don't need them, they're going in the scrap anyway, and why throw away some already pre-bent tubular steel? So I pinched it and I'm using it on here. Up here, I chamfered the edge of the tube and welded it to this brace, and then I cut out a piece of plate steel to go across there and down there and around, so it goes all the way underneath and all the way around. That's not weld, that's the plate. So it goes across the top, round the tube, and the tube's welded to here. That's solid, so it's not going anywhere. Yes, I know this beam here has rendered my rubber mounts completely pointless because it's now solid mounted, and it also stops me from taking the brace off. I'm trying to make it so that I can take this brace off the engine with as fewer bolts as possible. We've got this one here, which I might weld it onto there as well. Once it's all square, this will get welded to this and braced as well, so that's a nice solid mounting point. So what that means is I can undo the brace with one bolt on the back of there, one bolt here, one bolt there, this one, and whatever I put on the back there as well. There's a couple of mounts as well, so that it all comes off as a cradle. This brace, yes, I know it's welded solid at the moment. What that's doing is just giving me a little bit of rigidity to stop the rubber mounts from changing the position of the engine, because it's changed the position of this engine a couple of times and I've had to adjust some mounts to get the bonnet to shut properly. It does clear now, so that's a bonus. But what I will be doing is, once it's all, you know, arranged and sorted, and I've got the rest of the brace in. I've actually run out of welding wire at the minute, so I need some more gasless welding wire. Once it's all in and situated, and I don't need to move it anymore, what I will do is I'll cut the tacks off here, cut the tacks off there and the bottom there, and I will move this brace to, I might actually make a Y piece so that it comes down from here and then splits that way to this spreader bar and that way to this spreader bar, therefore, you know, spreading the load of the front here across the front of the front cross brace instead of all on this tube, and then put some rubber mounts on the end, some like suspension rubbers. I've also welded in the just under there, there's a plug weld on the side there, and some other welds, one just in there, one just in there, and there's one on the other side as well, and that's now solid. It was wiggling around before, so that's now in there solid, good and solid. These 3mm spreader plates are welded all the way around, apart from the back. I can't get to the back at the moment, but they're welded on 3 sides at the moment. And then this tube here is welded to those. That has given me enough space and enough strength to stop the cross member from splitting apart, and enough space to get the oil filter and the exhaust manifold in and situated, because as it was before, you just couldn't move the manifold around the front of the engine. There was no room for it. So that's what I've done so far. I think the next update, if I don't get any welding wire, will probably be either wiring inside the car, or potentially you know, changing some parts of the dashboard and getting the clocks onto the micra dash. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Running out of materials, running out of supplies, consumables, but it's getting there. My welding's not getting any better, but the bits of metal are stuck together and they're not coming apart again. I don't really care if it's pretty, as long as it's solid, which it appears to be. And you know what, I can always go over it afterwards and plate it, put some you know, put a triangulation brace around here, or you know, on this piece, I can go around that piece and put a 3mm plate across the front of it. Whatever needs to happen, I can do that. Yes, I'm aware that upright has got a channel down it, which does weaken it slightly. However, again, none of this is the final product. This is a mock-up in order to get proof of concept before either you know, re-engineering the mounts, or at least not redesigning, but altering, adding to, in order to strengthen them. Again, it might be that the rubber mounts are just too soft and I need Nismo mounts, which you know, are expensive and pretty much unnecessary if I can solid mount it to the chassis. And I've driven in cars with solid mounted engines before. Yeah, they're noisy, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be a road commuter. My other cars, the sort of daily, it's not very daily at the moment, but so yeah, it's not going to be a daily. If it's rough and ready, I'm going to have a bloody helmet on all the time when I'm driving it anyway. So again, it's not really necessary for it to be soft and pliable. And if it's hard mounted, you're less likely to have a chain jump off. The other thing I wanted to say while I'm here is I've seen a few videos recently online of cars leaving car shows. Not recent videos, obviously, but I've seen them recently. Cars leaving car shows, or cars with the drivers with a foot flat on the floor and popping and banging, and the captions for these videos states, "Oh, anti-lag. Oh, listen to the anti-lag on this Supra. Listen to the anti-lag on this," and blah blah blah. It's not anti-lag. How can I put this? If your car doesn't have a turbocharger, it's not anti-lag. If your car doesn't have a separate fuel and air injection system in the exhaust manifold, it's not anti-lag. Anti-lag is a rather complicated system that uses the heat of the exhaust manifold on a turbocharged car to ignite fuel and air in the turbo itself in order to keep it spinning. It's not what you think it is. Anti-lag will only operate when you've been on the throttle, you've spooled the turbo up, and then you lift off the throttle between gear changes or to balance the car, say a rally car in a rally stage, for instance. If you're balancing the car in a corner and you want to keep the turbo spinning, if you're off throttle, there's no fuel and air going through the turbo. So an anti-lag system throws extra fuel and air into the turbocharger, onto the exhaust manifold, which ignites in the hot exhaust and throws it through the turbo. And you get the characteristic pops coming out of the exhaust. That only happens off throttle. If you're, foot hard down on the throttle and you're hearing a ba 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 ba, the usual gunshot sound out the exhaust, that isn't anti-lag. That's a rev limiter. What you're doing there is you've got your foot flat on the throttle. You've got the throttle butterfly open. You've got fuel going into the engine, but it's not being ignited because the ECU is backing off either the timing or cutting the ignition to different cylinders in order to stop your lunch in the engine by over revving it. So it's like 4.5, 5,000 revs, and you've got your foot flat down, and it goes ah ba 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 ba. That's not an anti-lag system. It's just the ECU saying, I don't want this engine to rev to the moon. I'm going to cut the ignition back. What it doesn't do is cut the fuel. So you're getting extra fuel, which is causing the pops and bangs out the back of the car. There's another system called two-step. Now, the Americans coined the phrase two-step. And what two-step does is it's an over-exaggeration of the rev limiter at a certain RPM on, say, a drag car where you have a massive turbo that you need to spool up. In order to get the turbo spooled, you need load going through the engine. The only way you can get a load going through the engine at a certain RPM is to limit the RPM and keep increasing the fuel. And what that does with the fuel and air, especially with the turbos coming on boost, it increases the cylinder pressure, increases the amount of exhaust gases, and then spools the turbo quicker at a standstill. Then obviously when you lift off the clutch, you're at full boost or a preset boost, and you can drive off already in boost. If you don't have that two-step system or the pre-start boost settings on your ECU, it's usually on a clutch switch. You will be leaving with the turbo very, very likely either not spooled or very low in the boost threshold, and then you'll either bog down or stall it off the line, or you'll be very slow to pick up. The other system that people misname is launch control. Now, launch control is only really available in the sort of top-end supercars and sports cars. So you'll have Lamborghinis, Aston Martins, Ferraris, Nissan GTR has 3-stage launch control, with different settings. If you've got a car that, again, you sit on the line, it goes, and then you lift off the clutch and you go, that's not launch control. Again, we go back to the beginning where people start calling it anti-lag, where all it is a rev limiter. It's a fuel or ignition-based rev limiter. That's all it's there for. It's to save the engine. The manufacturers put that in so that if you're in neutral or if you've got the clutch pressed, you don't over-rev the engine or bounce it off the 7,000, 8,000 RPM limiter and destroy the engine. You keep it at a low between 3,500, 4,500 revs. Some people adjust them slightly, but it's not a launch control. Launch control relies on traction control and a preset throttle position that's controlled by the ECU in order to limit wheel spin. That's done on so Mercedes AMG GTR or whatever it's called. On that car, you preset the launch control. It holds the brakes. It loads up the transmission so that the torque converter in the automatic transmission is it's producing as much torque as it can without spinning the back wheels. It holds it there, and then when you let go of the brakes, releases the brakes. It actually massages the rear brakes, so it pumps the rear brakes to limit wheel spin, and it also backs off the throttle in order to prevent wheel spin as well, so that you get a maximum launch from the car. That's launch control, not your ST150 Ford Fiesta that goes brrr, and then wheel spins away. If you're wheel spinning, you haven't got launch control. It's one of these things that annoys me where you get videos that have got 3, 4, 5 million views. They're very influential, and with that, people that are perhaps less accustomed to the ins and outs of different ignition and exhaust systems and fueling systems, different types of cars and everything. These people that are less accustomed to that or new to the scene will see anti-lag printed on a YouTube video or an advert or a whatever it might be, or a Drive Tribe post, and it'll say anti-lag, and they'll go, "Oh, I've got anti-lag on my car because it does that." No, you haven't. I've actually got an Evo 6 exhaust manifold sat in my garden with ports on it that are specifically designed for a secondary air injection system for anti-lag. So you overfuel the engine, you pull back the ignition, and you squirt extra air into the exhaust to ignite the air-fuel mixture and expand the gases through the turbo while you're off the throttle, because there's no air coming through the engine. It has to come from somewhere, so it has to be injected into the exhaust manifold. Very difficult system to manage, and it's also an absolute pig to maintain for turbochargers because it overheats turbos. If you look up WRC anti-lag or Celica GT4 WRC anti-lag, there's anti-lag videos out there where you'll see them on a start line. They'll rev the engine and it'll rev up, and then as they're off the throttle, it'll sit there going off the throttle, but the exhaust's glowing hot, glowing red. The reason for that is because the engine's up to a certain RPM to spin the turbo up. Once the turbo's spun up and they're off the throttle, so they're not putting any input on the throttle pedal whatsoever, the engine itself is deciding, right, okay, you want the turbo spinning up. So it bypasses all the throttle system and it squirts air and fuel straight into the exhaust and spins the turbo. So that's that. I've done that to death. I've spoken on that for about 8 or 9 minutes now. So it would be nice if people used the correct terminology for stuff, or if they were unsure, just don't use it. I will continue to to comment on videos that I find where it's, oh, look at that anti-lag. Oh, how'd you get your anti-lag sorted? It's not anti-lag. Oh, it's traction control. No, it's not. It's not traction control. So anyway, so what's next for the car? Like I said, if I get some welding wire, I'll continue mounting the engine. If not, then I'll settle on doing some wiring. I've got to sort out this bundle of wiring here. This is for the car stuff. So headlight relays and wiper relays and that kind of stuff are in this section with fuses. The horn will probably get moved. That's already an aftermarket horn from because the original one sits here. So obviously it can't be there, so I've chucked one up there. You've also got battery cable because the battery is located in the boot. That's probably going to get removed because I'll be fitting a motorbike battery in here. There's loads of room, and a motorcycle battery is a damn sight lighter than a big lead acid car battery, so that'll be going in here. And then it'll be a case of, once this is mounted and in, taking it all out again and cleaning the engine bay up, removing anything that's not needed, painting it, welding any cracks up that need welding up, bracing anything, or supporting stuff, strengthening stuff, and then it's grind back all the rust and dirt and paint it. Yeah, so that's it for today. Not a lot else more to say, really. All I've been doing is cutting, grinding, and welding. So yeah, it will get better, and it won't look like this when it's finished. Just bear with me. Thank you very much.